Declan had flown home for a weekend he'd told no one in Seoul about and found his uncle exactly where he expected. Behind the desk, a bottle open earlier in the day than usual, a wedding photograph in his hands that had lived in the same silver frame for over 30 years. The photograph had hung in the study, or sat on this desk, through 3 different houses and one near fire that Seamus had run into a burning room to save it from, an act he had never fully explained to anyone and never intended to. Bridget in white, laughing at something off camera, Marcus's hand at the small of her back like he'd been holding it there his whole life and simply hadn't gotten around to meeting her yet. And at the edge of the frame, blurred by motion or bad timing or something more deliberate, a man Declan had never once thought to ask about. Declan had seen the photograph 100 times growing up. He had never once looked past his Aunt Bridget's veil to the blurred figure standing near the edge of the frame, a groomsman, unnamed in any story Declan had ever been told, present in every version of this family's history and mentioned in none of them. It was, he was beginning to understand, a particular Calloway talent, the careful curation of what got looked at and what got looked past, practiced so consistently across a generation that even the family's own children learned to look past the right things without ever being told to. "Who's that?" Declan asked, tapping the edge of the frame, behind the best man. Seamus went very still, the same stillness Declan had learned over years in this business to read as the loudest thing in a room. "An old associate," Seamus said, "from before your aunt married. He did business with the family back when the family's business was a different shape than it is now. Does he have a name?" "He does. It's not one you need tonight." Declan had learned patience the way every Calloway man learned it, as a survival skill, not a virtue. He did not push further. He simply filed the refusal away in the same part of himself where he had, over the years, filed 100 other small silences that had eventually, given enough time, told him more than the answers ever would have. You've kept this photograph through 2 moves and a fire, Uncle Seamus," Declan said carefully. "I've always assumed that was about Bridget. Was it ever also about him?" Seamus set the photograph down with a care that betrayed exactly how much the question had landed. "There are debts in this family older than you, Declan. Older than Sienna. Older in some cases than me. Some of them I've spent 30 years making sure never came due. I'd rather not discuss which ones tonight. You keep saying tonight, like there's a version of this conversation you're planning to have with me eventually. Is there?" Seamus poured himself another finger of whiskey he had no intention of drinking, a habit Declan had noticed growing more frequent over the past year, and had chosen, out of respect, not to comment on until now. "There is," Seamus said finally. "It's simply not this one. This one belongs to Sienna first. You'll have your answers, Declan. I promise you that. But you'll have them after she does, not before. Even you, whom I trust with nearly everything else in this life. Nearly everything. Nearly. A man my age is entitled to keep 1 or 2 things entirely his own, even from the people he loves best." Half a world away, Sung-hyun had pulled an old photograph of his own, a surveillance still from decades before the chairman's time, filed under a rival organization's history that the Yoon family kept out of caution going back 3 generations. He brought it to Jae-Won without explanation, sliding it across the desk. "This man," Sung-hyun said. "Your father flagged him once, years before you took over. A broker who moved between organizations without ever belonging to one. I found him again, this time in a wedding photograph tied to the Calloway name, in an archive Calloway Maritime uses for its corporate history page, of all places, hiding in plain sight." Jae-Won looked at the grainy image a long time. Something in the set of the man's shoulders, the particular economy of his stance, pulled at a memory Jae-Won hadn't examined in years, a story his father had told him once, half drunk on his own 40th birthday, about a man from the west of Ireland who had brokered a shipping arrangement for the Yoon family in the years before Jae-Won was born, and who had, according to his father, the coldest handshake and the warmest eyes of any man I ever did business with. "I know this face," Jae-Won said quietly. "I don't know from where yet, but I know it. My father spoke of a man like this once. An Irish broker. He said the man had walked away from organized business entirely, sometime in the late 80s, for reasons my father never fully explained. Something about a daughter." Sung-hyun's expression shifted, the pieces arranging themselves in real time behind his eyes. A daughter who married an American, Sung-hyun said slowly, and moved to New Orleans. Neither man said the rest of the sentence aloud. Neither needed to. Pull everything you can find on him, Jae-Won said. Discreetly. If he's who I think he is, he's spent 30 years making himself very difficult to find. I don't want to announce that we're looking before we know what we're looking at. And if he's her grandfather, then I will have spent months investigating the man responsible for keeping the woman I love alive and safe since before I ever met her, without once thinking to simply ask her about him myself. Sung-hyun heard something in that sentence he hadn't expected, not triumph at being close to an answer, but something closer to shame, a rare enough note in his chairman's voice that he filed it away without comment. A blurred man in an old photograph, 2 investigations on opposite sides of the world circling the same secret. Subscribe, they're closer than either of them knows.
In Ireland, Declan photographed the wedding picture on his phone before he left the study, unable to shake the feeling that the blurred man in the background mattered more than his uncle wanted him to think. He sent the photo to no one, not yet, but saved it in a folder on his phone he'd labeled, with the particular gallows humor he'd inherited from his father, Family History, Redacted Edition. In Seoul, Jae-Won stared at his own copy of A Stranger's Shoulders, equally certain, equally unable to say why the recognition felt so complete. He thought of Sienna's tattoo, Ogham script, ancient Irish, running the length of her spine, a language she had told him almost nothing about, beyond the fact that it meant something to her grandfather when she got it. He thought of a man his father had described, decades ago, as having walked away from organized business for reasons that involved a daughter.
2 men on opposite sides of the world were circling the same unnamed figure without knowing the other was circling at all, and both, in their own way, were beginning to suspect that the figure they circled was not a stranger to either of them, but the architecture beneath everything Sienna Delacroix believed about her own life. Neither man slept well that night for reasons that would have surprised the other. Declan lay awake calculating how long a promise could hold before it curdled into a lie by omission. Jae-Won lay awake with a photograph in a folder on his desk, thinking of a woman's tattoo running the length of her spine in a language neither of them could read, and wondering for the first time whether the man who taught her grandfather to keep secrets so completely might also be the man who had, without meaning to, taught his granddaughter how to keep her heart so carefully closed. Sienna, that same night, video called her Aunt Yolanda in New Orleans and asked, almost in passing, if anyone had ever heard her mother mention a man from Ireland who wasn't family but acted like it. Yolanda's answer took 3 seconds too long to arrive. "Why you asking me that, baby?" Yolanda said finally, in the too careful tone of a woman choosing every word like it might explode. "No reason," Sienna said, though she was already writing it down in the private ledger she kept of things that didn't add up. "Just something that crossed my mind." She hung up unsatisfied, the particular unsatisfied of a diagnostic instinct that has just been handed a data point, and immediately denied the follow-up question. She sat with her phone in her lap a long while, listing, without meaning to, everything in the last month that had felt slightly out of alignment with the life she thought she understood. Jae-Won's careful non-answer about her mother's name, the strange comfort of a stranger's voice in a hotel elevator, and now a 3-second silence from an aunt who had never once, in 38 years, hesitated before answering a direct question. None of it, individually, was proof of anything. Together, it had begun to feel like the outline of a shape she couldn't yet see completely. The exact sensation, she realized with a small chill, that she spent her professional life teaching executives to trust rather than dismiss. That's this episode of Whiskey and War. If you're new here, welcome. Hit subscribe so you don't lose your place. Next episode, permission. Trust me, you don't want to miss it.